Okay, hi everyone, welcome back to this video on the Comptia Security Plus course, Sinkholes and Blackholes. To combat DOS and DDoS attacks, security admins have the option to employ or make use of sinkholes, black holes and black hole lists. A DNS sinkhole is a DNS server that can be configured to hand out false information to bots and can detect and block malicious traffic by redirecting it to non-routable addresses. However, the sinkhole can also be used maliciously to redirect unwary users to unwanted IP addresses and domains. A DNS black hole is similar. It can be used to identify domains used by spammers, domains that contain malware, and so on, and block traffic to those domains. It can also be remotely triggered, known as a RTBH. A DNS black hole list, DNSBL, is a published list of IP addresses within DNS that contains the addresses of computers and networks involved in spamming and other malicious activities such as DDoS attacks initiated by botnets. The list can be downloaded and used on an organization's DNS server to help block zombie computers and botnets. Spoofing. A spoofing attack is when an attacker masquerades as another person by falsifying information. There are several types of spoofing attacks. The man-in-the-middle attack is not only a form of session hijacking, which we discuss in the next section, but it is also considered spoofing. Internet protocols and their associated applications can also be spoofed, especially if the protocols are poorly programmed in the first place. Web pages can also be spoofed in an attempt to fool users into thinking they're logging into a trusted website. This is known as URL spoofing and is used when attackers are fraudulently phishing for information such as usernames, passwords, credit card information and identities. Phishing can also be done through a false email that looks like it comes from a valid source. Often this is combined with email address spoofing, which hides and disguises the sender information. Defending against these type of spoofing attacks is difficult, but by carefully selecting and updating applications that your organization uses and through user awareness, spoofing can be held down to a minimum and, when necessary, ignored. Just about anything can be spoofed if enough work is put into it. An IP address is no exception. IP address spoofing is when IP packets are created with a forged source IP address in the header. This conceals where the packets originated from. Packet filtering and sessions that repeat authentication can defend against this type of spoofing. Also, updating operating systems and firmware and using newer operating systems and network devices helps to mitigate risks involved with IP spoofing. IP spoofing is commonly used in DOS attacks, as mentioned earlier, and is also common in TCP IP hijacking, which we discuss more in the next section. MAC addresses can also be spoofed. MAC addresses are usually unique, which helps to identify a particular system. This is the best type of address to use to identify a malicious insider or other attacker because it is more difficult to modify than an IP address. However, there are methods for attackers to change the MAC address of a network adapter or mask it so that the system cannot be identified properly. A World Wide Web name, WWN, can be spoofed to World Wide Web names and their derivatives. PWWN and NWWN are unique identifiers for SATA and fiber channel equipment that are common to storage area network. SANs, it's not really a name but a hexadecimal address that includes a 3-byte vendor identifier and a 3-byte vendor specified serial number. An attacker that is masquerading as an authorized WWN can be prevented by challenging the attacker to give unique information only to an authorized user or device. For a user, this might be information that corresponds to a password. For devices, a secret is associated with the WWN of the port of a SEN switch. Proper authentication is also beneficial when combating these types of spoof attacks. Session hijacking. Session hijacking is the exploitation of a computer session in an attempt to gain unauthorized access to data, services, or other resources on a computer. A few types of session hijacks can occur. Session theft can be accomplished by making use of packet header manipulation or by stealing a cookie from the client computer, which authenticates the client computer to a server. This is done at the application layer, and the cookies involved are often based off their corresponding web applications such as www.sessions. This can be combated by using encryption on long random numbers for the session key, the regeneration of the session after successful login. The challenge handshake authentication protocol CHAP can also be employed to require clients to periodically re-authenticate. However, session hijacking can also occur at the network layer, for example TCP hijacking. TCP hijacking, a common type of session hijacking due to its popularity among attackers, is when an attacker takes over a TCP session between two computers without the need of a cookie or any other type of host access. Because most authentication occurs only at the beginning of a standard TCP session, an attacker can attempt to gain access to a client computer anytime after the session begins. One way would be to spoof the client computer's IP address, then find out what was the last packet sequence number sent to the server, and then inject data into the session before the client sends another packet of information to the server. Remember the three-way handshake that occurs at the beginning of the session. This is the only authentication that occurs during the session. A synchronization SYN packet is sent by the client to the server, then a SYN ACK packet is sent by the server to the client, and finally an acknowledgement ACK packet is sent by the client to the server. An attacker can jump in anytime after this process and attempt to steal the session by injecting data into the data stream. This is the more difficult part. The attacker might need to perform a DOS attack on the client to stop it from sending any more packets so that the packet sequence number doesn't increase. In contrast, UDP sessions are easier to hijack because no packet sequence number exists. Targets for this type of attack include online games and also DNS queries. Blind hijacking, when an attacker blindly injects data into a data stream without being able to see whether the injection was successful. The attacker could be attempting to create a new administrator account or gain access to one. Clickjacking, when a user browsing the web is tricked into clicking something different than what the user thought he or she was clicking. It is usually implemented as a concealed link, embedded code, or a script on a website that executes when the user clicks that element. For example, a flash script when clicked could cause the user's webcam to turn on without the user's consent. The user is often redirected to a website from a malicious source. This can be prevented by updating the user's web browser and using third-party add-ons that watch for clickjacking code or scripts on the server-side web pages, such as iframes, must be managed carefully. There are JavaScript-based snippets that can be added and content security policies that can be configured to help manage frames. Man-in-the-middle attack, MITM. These attacks intercept all data between a client and a server. It is a type of active interception. If successful, all communication now go through the MITM attacking computer. The attacking computer can at this point modify the data, insert code and send it to the receiving computer. This type of eavesdropping is only successful when the attacker can properly impersonate each endpoint cryptographic protocols such as secure sockets layer SSL and transport layer security TLS address MITM attacks by using a mutually trusted third-party certification authority CA. These public key infrastructures PKI should use strong mutual authentication such as secret keys and strong password. Man in the browser MITB similar to MITM. This attack makes use of a Trojan from a proxy location that infects a vulnerable web browser and modifies web pages and online transactions in an attempt to ultimately steal money or data. For example, a user might make an online banking transaction and the user would see confirmation of the exact transaction, but on the banking side a different amount might have actually transferred, with some of it going to a different location altogether. This can be prevented by updating the web browser using transaction verification, often third party, and updating the anti-malware on the computer in question. Watering hole attack. This targeted attack is when an attacker profiles the websites that the intended victim accessed. The attacker then scans those websites for possible vulnerabilities. If the attacker locates a website that can be compromised, the website is then injected with a JavaScript or other similar code injection that is designed to redirect the user when the user returns to that site, also known as a pivot attack. The user is then redirected to a site with some sort of exploit code, and the rest is, well, history. The purpose is to infect computers in the organization's network, thereby allowing attacker to gain a foothold in the network for espionage or other reasons. Watering hole attacks are often designed to profile users of specific organizations, and as such an organization should develop policies to prevent these attacks. This can be done by updating anti-malware applications regularly and by other security control chapters in chapters 2 through 4, but also by using secure virtual browsers and have little connectivity to the rest of the system and the rest of the network. Replay. A replay attack is a network attack in which a valid data transmission is maliciously or fraudulently repeated or delayed. This differs from session hijacking in that the original session is simply intercepted and analyzed for later use. In a replay attack, an attacker might use a packet sniffer or intercept data and retransmit it later. In this way, the attacker can impersonate the entity that originally sent the data. For example, if customers were to log in to a banking website with their credentials while an attacker was watching, the attacker could possibly sniff out the packets that include the usernames and passwords and then possibly connect with those credentials later on. Of course, if the bank uses SSL or TLS to secure login sessions, then the attacker would have to decrypt the data as well, which could prove more difficult. An organization can defend against this attack in several ways. The first is to use session tokens that are transmitted to people the first time they attempt to connect and identify them subsequently. They are handed out randomly so that attackers cannot guess at token numbers. The second way is to implement time stamping and synchronization as in a Kerberos environment. A third way would be to use a time-stamped nonce, a random number issued by an authentication protocol that can be used only one time. You can also implement chat-based authentication protocols to provide protection against replay attacks. Null sessions. A null session is a connection to the Windows Interprocess Communication Share IPC $, I suppose. The null session attack is a type of exploit that makes unauthenticated net bias connections to a target computer. The attack uses ports 139 and 445, which are the net bias session port and server message block SMB port respectively. If successful, an attacker could find user IDs, share names, and various settings could possibly gain access to files, folders, or other resources. An example of the initial code an attacker might use is net use IP address IPC $$/U. Afterward, the attacker might use a program such as enum.exe or something similar to extract information from the remote computer, such as usernames. Finally, attacker might use a brute force attack in an attempt at cracking passwords and gaining more access. To protect against this attack, computers should be updated as soon as possible. However, the best way to defend against this attack is to filter out traffic on ports 139 and 445 with a firewall or a host-based intrusion prevention system. When a firewall is enabled, ports 139 and 445 will not appear to exist. Transitive access and client-side attacks. Transitive access is not really a specific attack, but a way or means of attacking a computer. It is based on the transitive property in mathematics, which states that whenever A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C is summed up as if A is equal to B, B is equal to C, and then A equals C. That's just a piece of the transitive property, but you get the gist of it. What we are really dealing with here is trust. Does one computer on the LAN trust another? Can that trust be manipulated? For example, let's say that computer C is a server that holds a database. Now let's say that computer B is a client on the LAN that frequently accesses the database and is authorized to do so. This is all well and good and is normal. However, add in the attacker at computer A. If the attacker can somehow create a trusted environment between computer A and computer B, then by the way of transitivity, the attacker can obtain a trust with computer C, and then the database can become compromised. Normally the attacker at computer A cannot access the database at computer C, but by compromising computer B, the attacker can then launch a client-side attack, one that is coming from computer A, one that is coming from a computer on the LAN that would otherwise be harmless. Trusting relationships are created between computers and sometimes networks to save time and to bypass authentication methods. It would seem like a good idea at first, but when you think of all the vulnerable operating systems and applications on client computers, each one of which is a possible opening for a transitive access, it makes sense that nowadays the general rule is to have every client computer authenticated whenever any session is started to another computer, perhaps even twice. Implementing this practice along with the use of firewalls, intrusion detection, prevention systems and updates is the best way to prevent transitive access and client-side attacks. In many environments, the rule is that no one computer should trust any other by default. If a computer needs to do so, it happens only temporarily and in a secure fashion. DNS poisoning and other DNS attacks. DNS poisoning or DNS cache poisoning is the modification of name resolution information that should be in a DNS server's cache. It's done to redirect client computers to incorrect websites. This can happen through improper software design, misconfiguration of name service, and maliciously designed scenarios exploiting the traditionality open architecture of the DNS system. Let's say a client wants to go to www.comptia.org. That client's DNS server will have a cache of information about domain names and their corresponding IP addresses. If Comptia's site were visited in the recent past by any client accessing the DNS server. Its domain name and IP should be in the DNS server's cache. If the cache is poisoned, it could be modified in such a way to redirect requests for www.comptia.org to a different IP address and website. This other site could be a phishing site or could be malicious in some other way. This attack can be countered by using transport layer security, TLS, and digital signatures, or by using DNS-SEC, which uses encrypted electronic signatures when passing DNS information, and finally by patching the DNS server. You might use a transaction signature TSIG to provide authentication for DNS database updates. This protocol uses shared secret keys and one-way hashing to provide security. One item of note: the hashing procedure might not be secure enough for your organization, so you may want to consider alternatives when updating DNS databases. Unauthorized zone transfers are another bane to DNS servers. Zone transfers replicate the database that contains DNS data. They operate on top of TCP. If a zone transfer is initiated, say through a reconnaissance attack, server name and IP address information can be stolen, resulting in the attacker accessing various hosts by IP address. To defend against this, zone transfers should be restricted and audited in an attempt to eliminate unauthorized zone transfers and to identify anyone who tries to exploit the DNS server in this manner. Vigilant logging of the DNS server and the regular checking of DNS records can help detect unauthorized zone transfers. A Windows computer host file can also be the victim of attack. The host file is used on a local computer to translate or resolve host names to IP addresses. This is the predecessor to DNS, although the file is normally empty of entries, it is still read and parsed by Windows operating systems. Attacker may attempt to hijack the host file in an attempt to alter or poison it, or to try to have the client bypass DNS altogether. The best defense for this is to modify the computer's host file permission to read only. It is located at the following path: system root, system32, drivers, etc. If the file has already been hijacked and you don't use the file for any static entries, delete it, and Windows should recreate it automatically at the next system startup. If Windows does not, then a standard host file can easily be recreated by simply making a blank host.txt file and placing it in the path I mentioned previously. The host file is used by some people as a security measure as well. This is done by adding entries that redirect known bad domains to other safe locations or the local host. Generally, this is done in conjunction with disabling the DNS client service. However, in general, the DNS client service is required by the average Windows user. Host files and vulnerable DNS software can also be victims of pharming attacks. Pharming is when an attacker redirects one website's traffic to another website that is bogus and possibly malicious. Pharming can be prevented by carefully monitoring DNS configurations and host files. Unfortunately, if an ISP's DNS server is compromised, that will be passed on to small office, home office routers that the ISP services. So it then becomes more important for end users to be conscious of pharming. They can prevent it by turning on phishing and pharming filters within the browser and being careful of which websites they access. Users can also check their local host files. By default, the file doesn't have any entries. So if they see entries and have never modified the file themselves, they should either delete the entries or delete the file entirely. Although it is less of an actual attack, domain name kiting, or simply domain kiting, is the process of deleting a domain name during the 5-day grace period known as the add grace period, or AGP, and immediately re-registering it for another 5-day period. This process is repeated at any number of times, with the end result of having the domain registered without ever actually paying for it. It is a malicious attack on the entire domain name system by misusing the domain tasting grace period. The result is that a legitimate company or organization often cannot secure the domain name of its choice. As you can see, the DNS server can be the victim of many attacks due to its visibility on the internet. It should be closely monitored at all times. Other highly visible servers such as web servers and mail servers should likewise be monitored, audited and patched as soon as updates are available. So I won't even here today for this video. If you like listening, please consider like, sharing and subscribing. Thank you.